Hey everybody, do you have a Soundcraft UI24r mixer and have you been wondering how the AUXES work? Well, I'm going to show you right now. Let's go! So what is an AUX? Why do we have it? Why do we use them? Well, an AUX is just another place you can send signal to in your console that acts like another mix. Very similar to what you would be sending out to the house if you were mixing a show. Now, it can be the same as that house mix, or it can be independent. And generally, that's what people use it for, to have an independent mix of their instrumentation that is separate from the house mix. The perfect example of this is a speaker or a monitor for your artists on stage. If you're a guitar player or a singer and you need to hear a mix of the instrumentation that is completely separate from what's going out to the house, that's when you would use an AUX. Now, in a console this size, the AUX outputs in the software are generally linked, at least by default, to physical outputs on the device. Now, in some bigger, more expensive consoles, that's not necessarily the case. You have to tell it where you want it to go every time. But in the case of this Soundcraft mixer, the first 8 AUX channels are linked by default to the 8 AUX outputs on the front of the device. You can change that in patching if you want to, but by default, that's where they go. So let's have a look at our software here. You can see I've got 2 versions of the window open. This one here, which is showing everything, and this one over here, which only has 2 channel strips visible. The reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to have to constantly jump back and forth on this larger layout to show you what I'm talking about. But just so you understand what we're seeing is on this larger layout, here's our first input. This is our microphone, and I have that patched into channel 1, the physical channel 1 on the front of the console. And I have it showing up here on the very first channel strip. Now, our AUXes, they have faders as well, but in the full view, you have to scroll all the way down here before you can see them. So you'll notice this changing on the other screen too. So all I've done is I've made a very small view over here that just shows our first channel strip, which is our microphone way back here. So you can see if I move it on one, it moves on the other. And then of course, the second channel strip is this AUX1 fader right here. So that's just to save some jumping back and forth. You can create a view like this by using your view groups here. I've got a bunch already set up, but basically you just hold the view group and then you can choose which channels you want and in which order you want them in. They will show up in the order you click. So you can see right now AUX1 is showing up as 1 and microphone is showing up as 2. But I actually want that to be reversed. So now this is 1 and this is 2. And that's how you create a view group like what I've got here. Anyway, now that you know what we're looking at, let's talk about how things function. So I'm going to scroll this all the way back just so we can see this. And so this is where you see your instrument or vocal inputs. Now, how do we get signal to an AUX? How does an AUX work? You need to think of your AUX as a destination. If it helps for you to think about it as a speaker where you're sending signal to, that's great. By all means, keep that in your head. When I'm talking to somebody who doesn't fully understand the concept, I like to do it this way. I can think of the AUX as a bucket. And the reason I do this is because it's an intermediary. There's a step that you have to get to before you get signal in and signal out to your speaker. So we're going to call that bucket is our intermediary. So this is our AUX and we'll make it our AUX1 bucket. So to get signal to an AUX, you need to take a signal that exists, send it into the bucket, manipulate it however you want to manipulate it while it's there, and then get it back to the mixer before it goes out to the speaker. So to do that in this mixer, what you have to do is take your signal, send it to an aux send, which is this button up here. And once you've manipulated it inside your aux bucket, it has to come back to the mixer before it leaves on a physical output. So this is the aux send. This is how you get signal into the bucket. And when we come back to our main view over here, this is the return. This is where it comes back from the bucket into the mixer after manipulation and before it leaves on a speaker. So this right here, again, which is this, is where it comes back to the mixer after manipulation. So instrument into the bucket, manipulated, sent back to the mixer, and off to a speaker. That's the idea of how an aux works. So how do we actually do that on this console? So in the Soundcraft UI, to get signal to an aux, you need to choose your aux send button. And once you choose the aux send button, you'll see up at the top we have an indicator for all of our auxes. The first 8, which are physical outputs already, and 9, 10, which start off as virtual outputs. You can change those to actually use physical outputs in your patching if you want to, but by default, they're just virtual. We're not going to get into the patching, the physical output patching of auxes in this video. That's a totally separate video. This is just so you understand how the signal flow works. So when you've chosen your aux send button, you get these tabs at the top that represent each of our aux buckets, 1 through 10. So in this case, we're going to do everything in aux 1, and I'll change this view as well. So aux send is chosen, and when you choose one of your tabs at the top, you can see that the view underneath it does not change, which makes a lot of sense. The whole purpose of what we're doing is deciding what signal from our list of instruments, vocals, inputs, whatever you want to call them, it's choosing from that list what's going to go into our aux bucket. So you choose aux sends, you choose the aux destination that you want, for us aux 1, and then down here from our list of inputs, you raise the fader for the inputs that you want to go to that aux destination. It can be any mix of what you have available as inputs. In my case, we're only using 1 right now, so we're only using the microphone. And this fader, this is the amount of signal that you are going to send of your microphone into the aux. And this level can be different from what you're sending out to the main house mix. So choose aux send, choose your aux destination, and bring up the send fader for whatever inputs you want. Once you've done that, it's not automatically going out of a speaker. Remember, all we've done is take our instrument, send it into the bucket so we can manipulate it in whatever way we want. We haven't manipulated it yet, but it now has to go back to the mixer. So we would go out of here and we would scroll all the way over to our aux 1. In this view, we've got our 2 things here. So right now, this aux fader, which is actually the return from the aux bucket, is down. If I bring this up, we're going to actually start to hear signal coming out of a speaker in my room. Check, check, 1, 2, check, 1, 2. You can hear that's fairly well amplified. On my right side, I have a speaker that is linked to the first aux output, and on my left, I have my speaker that's coming out of my main house mix. So you're probably noticing at this point that the microphone fader is actually down, but we're getting signal to our aux bucket and back to the mixer. We're turning it up, and now it's leaving the mixer on a speaker. And we're going to talk about why that's happening in just a second. But this is the workflow. If you want to get signal into an aux, back to the mixer, and then out on a speaker, you choose the aux sends, you choose the destination you want, and then you raise the fader. Go back to your main view, raise the master return from the aux destination, and that will now go out on a speaker by default. It will just work by default because of the way these things are set up. We're going to talk about this again in just a second, why that's default, why we're seeing signal, hearing signal, even though the microphone fader is down. But that's our signal flow. That's how you get it into the bucket. That's how you get it back to the mixer and out on a speaker. Now, you'll also notice in here that I've got signal from my microphone going to aux 1, but if I choose a different destination, there's no fader up. There's no signal going to those destinations. And that makes sense. These are all independent. They can be the same, you can make them match, but by default they are all independent of one another, which is great. That's what most people want. If you're setting up mixes for artists on stage, each performer is probably going to want their own mix. So that's how this works. Each aux destination takes its own mix of your available inputs, lets you manipulate it in whatever way you want, send it back to the mixer, and then out to a different speaker, to a different destination, wherever you need it to be. Okay, so now let's talk about why we're seeing and hearing signal even though our main fader for our microphone is down. So I'm just going to pull this down for a second. And let's actually get off the AUXES here. Okay, the reason you are seeing and hearing signal even though our main fader is down is because we are sending signal to our aux destination, our aux bucket, pre-fader. What does that mean? Let's go into our AUXES here. You can see we have a button right here that says pre. Now, all of these by default are pre, meaning any signal we send to any of our aux destinations are set by default to go pre-fader. And what this means is that it sends level from our inputs regardless of what you are doing with the main fader. And again, that makes sense. If you're sending signal to a mix on stage for an artist, you don't generally want that to be affected by what you are doing for the house mix. If you did, you'd be changing things on the fly in the speaker for your artist, and that's not usually what people want. It can get confusing. They'd start to lose the ability to differentiate between instruments. They might lose an instrument altogether depending on what you're doing for the main mix. So sending signal pre-fader, meaning before the main fader, makes a lot of sense. It gives you an independent control of the mixes for your artists and the mix for your front of house. Now, if you want to, you can change that. You can make it reflect what's happening in the front of house mix as well. So if we go back into our AUXES and we click on this pre button, it goes to post. So post means after the fader, after this main instrument fader. So now anything we do for our house mix is also going to be reflected on AUX1 with this fader, and any fader that we set, any instrument we set to post and choose a level for. Now if we alter these same channels in our main mix, exactly what we've done in our main mix will show up the same way in our aux mix, our aux bucket. So if you needed to send a duplicate of your main house mix somewhere, this would be an easy way to do it. Maybe it's almost identical. Maybe you're missing an instrument or two, but overall you'd like it to reflect the changes that you're making in the house. Maybe this is for a broadcast you're doing or some stream of some kind. This is a way that you could do that by changing your send channels to be post instead of pre. So you'll notice we also have a button here called post-processing. By default, all of these channels are set to post-processing. So that means after processing. What processing is it talking about? Well, let's choose our microphone over here and let's click the edit button. You can see that we have some tabs that have shown up now. We've got Digitech for the first few channels. We've got EQ, gate, comp for all the channels, as well as our sends tabs and our patching tab here. So what we're referring to with processing is EQ, gate, and compression. By default, all of these are set to post-processing, which means any changes we make inside of our EQ, of our gate, and our compressor, that will be reflected in this aux mix that you're making. If you didn't want that to happen, you could click on this button and change it to pre-processing. So now that means the signal is going to be unaffected by EQ, gate, and compression. So why would you do this? Well, if you were creating a house mix here on your main page and you needed to EQ your instruments based on the house, but you didn't want that same EQ to show up in your aux mix, you could change it to pre-processing, and then any EQ changes you make on your first channel would not be reflected in your aux send. So does this make sense? Would you want that to be the case? If you were sending it to an artist on stage, probably not. You're EQing for the house, but you're also EQing for your stage mixes for your artists. Where this might come in handy is if you were sending something to a multi-track to record your show or your live event, and you wanted that signal to be raw, unaffected. You could turn on pre-processing, and then you're just getting a raw signal from the input of the mixer right out the aux send to your DAW. There's other ways to do that in this console, but that's, again, another video. This is just talking through why you might do some of these things. So keep in mind, post-processing, which is on by default, will take the signal from your instruments and your inputs. It will take any changes you make to EQ, gate, and compression and send it that way to your aux sends. Pre-processing takes the signal from your inputs, but it skips your EQ, your gate, and compression. So right now I'm going to give you a little demonstration of how the signal is flowing in this mixer. So remember, on this side of me I have a speaker that is taking signal out of the AUX1 output. On this side I have a speaker that is taking my main house mix. So right now, if I take this microphone and I raise my microphone fader on channel strip 1, check, 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 we're not hearing anything. Why? Because our master's down. So let's raise our master fader. This is our house mix. Check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you can hear it being amplified out of the house mix. I'm going to turn this back down, and now I'm going to raise AUX1 master, or return, our AUX1 return, which is the same thing that is over here. So let's bring this up. Check, 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 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can hear it amplified. It's over here. I know you're probably not able to differentiate between sides, but that's where this one is coming from. And you know it's separate from the other one because the main volume is still down. I'll turn that one up too. Check, 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 check. You could hear I'm starting to get a little feedback. But that's how signal is flowing. If I leave the aux down, bring up the master fader for my house mix, bring up my microphone fader, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2. That's my house mix. And if I leave that down, because remember we have this set to pre, I'm going to turn off post-processing for now, but we have the channel set to pre going to our AUX1. So even with this down, I can bring this up, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, and we have amplification. So we know we've got separation of our mixes there because of the pre-fader send on the aux send, pre right here. So let's just have a little demonstration of pre and post processing. So let's leave this up, and we're going to bring up the microphone here for our house mix, and we're going to go into edit, and we're going to go into EQ, and I'm going to start manipulating it here. Check, 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 check. Ooh, check, 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 check. Sounds terrible, but you can hear that I'm affecting the signal. So right now, if we come out of here and go into our aux send, post processing, after the processing. So if I turn down my house mix and I bring up my aux mix, check, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, it should be affected by the same things. So let's choose our microphone again, click on edit, and make some changes here. Check, 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 check. Again, sounds terrible, feedback, but you get the idea. The changes we make here are being heard in our aux mix. So let's go out of here, go back into our aux sends, and let's change this to post-processing. Come out of here, go back into our microphone edit, and start making changes. Check, check. Look, no change. Nothing I'm doing has any effect on what's happening on the aux mix. It's still happening on the main house mix. I'll bring this up. Check, 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 check. Check. You can see it's still happening on the house mix, but it's not happening on the aux mix. So that's pre and post processing at work. Now remember, the same is true for gate and compression. Any changes we make in these two while we are set to post processing will be picked up on our aux mix. And if we change to pre-processing, anything we do in gate and compression will not be reflected. Same thing, EQ, gate, compression, that's the processing that the mixer is referring to with pre and post processing. So there you go, a really quick overview on how to take your input signals, send it to your aux, manipulate it, send it back to the mixer, and then send it out to a speaker. I hope this was interesting, entertaining, educational. If it was any of those three things, do all the stuff. Like, share, subscribe. You can check us out on Patreon. You can join the channel down below here on YouTube. And any of those things are a huge help to move this channel forward. Until we see you next time, thanks for watching here on Quick and Easy Quickies. See you later, everybody.